tabled it or continued it until this meeting. We still don't have the minutes. And it's not on the agenda. We could add it to the agenda if we had the minutes, but we don't. I forgot to mention it to Leslie too. So. It's my wake-up call.
It may be responding.
What's that?
It may be indicating from the screen. Yep. I think Leslie's doing it.
Oh, that was the door? Oh, is it people trying to get into the Zoom?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's 4 of us. We need Cameron though, because he's got to talk. He usually gets here right, I think, just in the nick of time. Bob's not going to be here, so. No. I'll do it. Well, we gotta get that, get slides or talking points from him either, so.
Recording in progress.
Good evening. I'm Paul Kunkemuller. I'm the chair of the City of Groton Planning and Zoning Commission, and I'm going to call our Tuesday, November 19th, 2024 meeting to order at 6:32. First item on our agenda is the roll call. I am here. Ms. Bergeron is here. Mr. Boris is not here. Mr. Jenkins is not here. Mr. James is here. Mrs. Lothrop is here, and Mr. Rusk is here. So we have a quorum. First item on our agenda is a presentation. This is a public presentation about the proposed zoning regulation changes. 6:32 to start. All right. So first of all, welcome all, and thank you for participating tonight. And welcome to those on Zoom as well. As I said, I'm Paul Kunkemuller. I'd like to welcome you all. This is an introduction to the proposed regulation changes for the GC zone. We're holding this information session really based on feedback we received at the earlier public hearings on the previous application for this for some of these changes. So we're going to plan to follow a format tonight that's used by the town at similar sessions that they've held. In the way this will work is you can go to the next slide. Or is it? And by the way, as long as we're talking about the town sessions, there's another one tomorrow, actually, at 5:45 at the Groton Middle School about housing affordability. So, but they do put those on a sort of every few months basis, and they can be very interesting. So, if anybody's interested, all right. The way this is going to work is the commissioners and the city planner are going to review the proposed changes as well as some of the background and rationale for them. And then we're going to ask you to write your questions on index cards that we will collect, and at the end of the presentation we'll answer those. This is this so you please make sure you have the index cards, you have something to write with. If you're on the Zoom, we'll take those questions by chat. If you have any questions on Zoom, you can put them in the chat and we'll try to take them from there. Leslie, next slide up. So again, the session's being recorded, and it will be available. Yeah, there you go. And it will be available online. The public will have another opportunity to speak. We're going to have a public hearing once we have once there's an official application is filed. We'll schedule a public hearing, and everyone will have a chance to speak then. And who votes on these is the Planning and Zoning Commission is the body that approves the regulation changes. So just so everything's clear there and how this is going to work. There'll be two applications, really, one for the text amendment and the second one for the zoning map changes. So there will be two applications that we'll have a public hearing on and that will be voted on by the commission. So next slide. So what we're going to talk about tonight, we'll talk about what zoning can and can't do. We're going to talk about what housing needs are, what's driving it, which is also has to do with the workforce expansion in the area. We'll talk a little bit about the Thames Street study and what the recommendations were from that. Then we'll dig into the proposed zoning map changes and the density impacts. Then we'll look at an approved use table, which is part of the new regulations that makes it quite easy to tell what is allowed where. We'll talk about parking, and then we'll talk about the plan of conservation and development, the principles, and the benefits for the city from the planning principles. And then also we'll talk about the dimensional standards and we'll have some renderings of what some of these changes might look like. And dimensional standards are basically just a summary of how big the building can be, how tall, what the setbacks have to be, those kind of things. But we'll touch on those as well. All right. So what zoning can and can't do? So zoning can regulate building height. It can regulate lot coverage, which is how much of the lot can be covered by the building, and also by parking and things like that. It can regulate non-public parking, so parking on commercial property, and in the location and the maximum and minimum requirements. Can regulate pervious versus impervious surfaces. So does it drain? Does it not drain? It also can establish landscape standards. It has regulatory authority over exterior lighting, signs. There's a fairly large section in the regulations about signage, where buildings can be located, what they can be used for, the form of the building, and even things like trash location, and there are other things too that are, less, I guess, less important, but nonetheless, those are some of the major things that zoning can regulate. Next slide. So what zoning can't regulate is behavior, which is in noise. Those are police matters, building colors. That could be a historic district issue. Architectural style, again, those are typically in historic districts. Housing decisions based on the impact of the children in the school system. Though it's illegal to use that as a decision criteria in the state of Connecticut. We can't regulate the ethnic, religion, gender identity, race, or other protected class of tenants or property owners. That's also illegal. And speed, parking, and traffic direction on public highways, that's regulated by that's controlled by the police. So we don't control that either. So this is just an aerial view of the location we're talking about. We're generally talking about the Bridge Street, North Thames Street area. We're also talking about Bridge Street as it extends east of the interchange with the ramp from the Interstate 95. So we've got Bridge Street for most of its entire length, this part of the discussion, and then that northern part of Thames that's basically north of Broad. All right, next slide, please. So we're all oriented. So talk a little bit about housing needs. So there have been 2 housing studies done by the town, one in 2021 and a second one in 2023. It was done by the town Department of Planning and Economic Development, and there was also, of course, the consultant was involved. In the 2021 study, this question has come up a couple of times in previous public hearings about, how many dwelling units are there. So in the 2021 study, they did do a count of the housing supply based on, on 2019 data from the Census Bureau, but there are roughly 18,000 dwelling units
there were 18,000 dwelling units in the town of Groton at that time. And the breakdown was roughly 43% were owner-occupied and about 46% were rentals. We've also got a seasonably vacant category, which is somewhat unusual, but those are the kind of homes that are, occupied mostly in the summer and owned by people who actually live out of town. So, there's a lot of those in, say, Groton Long Point, for example. But that's a category that's a little bit unusual. So anyway, that was the housing stock in 2019. It has changed a little bit, but not tremendously since then. All right, so the housing needs in the 2021 study. So, the estimated in the 2021 study, the estimated 10-year potential housing demand was about 5,300 units. So 5,260 was the exact number that was projected. And they were 40% of those were thought to would be owner occupied and 60% rental. And we'll talk a little bit about why the rental number is higher than the owner number. It's different than the current mix, but that's based on some of the other drivers. So those include the local workforce hiring. So there's certainly been an expansion at Electric Boat, and the local economy is actually growing fairly vigorously. Then there's also the other driver is capturing commuters. So this has to do with people who work in Groton but don't live here. And in fact, less than 20% of the people who work in Groton actually live in Groton. So one potential driver for housing need is having some of those folks decide to live in Groton rather than commute. There's also pent-up demand for housing, especially for upscale apartment units. A lot of the housing stock is older, and so there's demand for newer housing units. And there's also a trend toward smaller household size, and that's largely due to an aging population. Excuse me, as folks get older, the housing size shrinks. So fewer people living in the home. When people get to be 55 and up, it's closer to 2 than it is to 3. But there's an interesting sort of, one of the things that they looked at as part of the study was the demographics of the town, and the 20 to 29-year-old, 20 to 39-year-old population in the town is about 22%, and that's greater than the region, it's greater than the state of Connecticut, and it's greater than the country at large. So we have actually a relatively large percentage of our population between 20 and 39, and then our greater than 55 is also another large group, and that's roughly a third of the population in town, which is similar to the region, to the state, but it's larger than the country overall. So those are the two groups, though, the younger folks and the older folks who have the lowest average housing size. So that tends to push a need for more units and also more rental units. For one thing, it's, younger people aren't buying homes. Affordability is an issue for them. And older folks also tend to age out of homes because they don't want to necessarily be maintaining them and taking care of a yard and things like that. So there's often older folks who are looking for rental units to move to. Other drivers are we've got the immediate proximity to major employers, which is especially an advantage to the city since EB and Pfizer are right down the street. And it also, that proximity provides a competitive advantage for the town and the city in terms of absorbing some of the housing demand. And the old saying is, retail follows rooftops. So, if we want to grow businesses in town and on Thames Street, the thing that you need is people. That's the thing that, that will really drive that. The other thing, there's a couple of challenges. One of those is the lack of readily developable land and sites. The lack of an attractive walkable downtown in Groton is definitely a disadvantage. There's no town center, but again, the city has the potential to develop that kind of a walkable town center on Thames Street. So, we could turn that into an advantage for the city potentially. And, so Thames Street certainly has potential there. And then there's the quality of place. Again, the walkable downtown. The developable land issue is a problem, but there's one of the, again, an advantage to the city is that it has parcels that are suited to multifamily development, that are underutilized and in some cases vacant, and could therefore, be transitioned into, again, turn that challenge into an advantage, because we do have some sites, not so much for development of a lot of single-family homes, but we do have sites that would lend themselves to multifamily development. All right. So the housing study was updated in 2023, and the estimated potential demand went up to 6,400 units, which, in a 2-year span was like a 23% increase. And again, it's, would be divided between owner occupied and rentals. But, really what changed in that time? Economic growth has been stronger than was originally projected. The region is expected to add 2,200 households over the next decade, which is a 24% increase overall. So that's, things are going better than had originally been anticipated by the people who did the study. Another thing that's going on is that, of course, the price of single-family homes has escalated significantly. So that means they're more difficult to afford. Which, and it also makes this is one of the factors that drives rental demand in multifamily rentals, is the fact that single-family homes are so expensive. The housing construction hasn't kept pace with demand either. I looked at the statistics. There were 1,700 roughly building permits issued in the region in 2004, and that dropped to 400 in 2008. So it dropped from 1,700 to 400. So the amount of buildings permits being issued went way down, and it has not increased significantly from that level since 2008. So I mean, I think it's widely understood that nationally and then locally we have the same issue, where housing construction just fell apart after the 2008 recession, and it hasn't come back. The other thing that's different from when the original study was done is that the apartment vacancy rate went down to 2.3%, which is in 2023, which is extremely low. It means that there are virtually no rental units available. And it also is driving increased rents. And we've seen some unfortunate situations where rents were raised significantly for tenants, and there were some evictions, and people had no place to go. But it's a supply problem. And that's one of the things that we think we may be able to address. We also have this increase in empty nesters, and many of them don't want to live in a single-family home any longer, but they lack available alternatives in Groton for rentals. And then the land is limited. There's not a lot of land available. We've got a lot of open space in Groton, and it really turns out that multifamily housing is a more efficient use of land because it puts more people per acre, and it promotes conservation of open space, which is not always, it's not necessarily obvious, but that's one thing to keep in mind as well. So what's the opportunity? So we've got the EB projects employment's going to grow by 23% over the next 5 years. We know that EB also projects that they'll have like 0.9 indirect jobs to be created for every direct EB job. So that's another 1,900 or so jobs that would be created in addition to the ones at EB. The Columbia-class submarines are the Navy's highest construction priority. That's, so that's going to happen. EB's not the only growth driver, but they're certainly the largest. But the regional economic growth should drive sustained housing demand. So that's the opportunity is then to leverage that growth in housing demand to revitalize Thames Street. And so then how do we do that? So, we have a study was done on Thames Street, and recommendations were made in August of 2019. And if we can implement that, that would be a way to capitalize on the housing demand, the need that people in the community have for housing, and also to do something that the city has been wanting to do for years, and that's to revitalize Thames Street. So the big recommendation there from the Thames Street study was to concentrate denser development at Upper Thames Street, Bridge Street, to take advantage of the topography, the parcel sizes, and the limited flood zone issues. And I'll talk about those in a minute. The other thing that is needed to encourage development is to make some changes to the zoning regulations, and that's really the focus of what we're here to talk about. But the recommendations from the Thames Street study were to allow multifamily housing, and I've cited the page numbers in the Thames Street study in the slide, so if anybody wants to go and check, they can look them up. Reduce the parking requirements, which we also addressed in the proposed update, and then adding some design considerations. And that would have to do with siting on the lots and things like that. So a little background on the Thames Street study. It was done by Ninegret Partners, and they used a multi-step process to develop the plan, and they collected data they did site visits, they had stakeholder interviews, they talked to city officials, business owners, property owners, members of the community. They reviewed the city plan of conservation and development, which identifies Thames Street as a primary area for investment. I think there were 11 citations in the POCD that mentioned development on Thames Street. They did an open house style public workshop and an online survey to gather community priorities and concerns. And I know I attended that public workshop, and I imagine I think there was probably several people who are in this room tonight who are also there. And then they issued the report in August of 2019 that has recommendations for strengthening and enhancing Thames Street. So the recommendations, what did they talk about? What did they suggest that we do? Really, it was as I mentioned, it was to concentrate the development at Upper Thames Street and Bridge Street. That's the big one that we're going to talk about. But they also talked about maximizing the walkable historic coastal village feel that already exists there, enhancing the waterfront and, creating a little bit of a buffer around EB. But as I mentioned, the thing that we really want to talk about is the denser development in Upper Thames and Bridge. So, again, why is this a good area to do it? This wasn't just picked, at random. It was picked because there are relatively large parcels and that would lend themselves to development. Many of them, or several of them, are vacant or underutilized, so they could be repurposed. And then again, the topography allows taller buildings that without obstructing view corridors. And that observation is taken directly from the Thames Street study. As far as the how, there were three major changes. Again, we talked about change in designated use. So this would be to allow parcels in a general commercial zone to be used for residential development. Right now, the regulations limit us to 2 residential units per parcel, so it's very limited. So this was one of them to allow more residential development in the general commercial zone, to decrease the parking requirements in order to optimize available developable land, and then to modify the current multifamily standards that don't allow mid-density development envisioned for the site. So one more, I think, slide about the Thames River study. So this is just a conceptual plan. It's, it's not anything that's being proposed or has been designed or proposed by a developer or anything. It's right out of the Thames River the Thames Street study. But what it shows is on the larger parcels on North Thames Street, there's an apartment building that has 104 units, 4 stories, and 8 townhomes. So one of the things that I think to take away from this is that the amount of space required for a 104-unit building and the parking is fairly significant. It's not like you can put 500 units in that area. That space would potentially accommodate like 100. So anyway, that's was a conceptual design. I think it's it's interesting and certainly something that might work. Another point I want to make about the parcels. Most of the parcels that would be affected by these regulation changes are already have a building on them or are already used. So there's very few actually completely vacant parcels with no buildings on them. The biggest one is where the roller rink used to be on Bridge Street, right by the 95 ramp. So I'm going to hand it over to Jason.
Okay. Thanks, Paul. So this evening's presentation is a culmination of a couple years' worth of work. Some of you may have been present at the last December and last January's public hearings where we presented a proposed set of regulation changes, and we received quite a bit of feedback. And you're familiar with the aerial drawing and the color drawing there. The area of town we're talking about is from Broad Street on Thames Street, north to where it intersects with Bridge, east along Bridge, to the intersection of North, further east, as Paul said, as far east as the property, I think, where there's an existing hotel, I think that's the eastern boundary of it. And then down North Street to Meridian, that comprises the northern part of the general commercial zone, GC zone. There are a couple other sections of the GC zone that we're not really talking about tonight. They're further south on Mitchell and along Thames Street where Thames intersects with Eastern Point Road. Part of the feedback we received was that our last attempt at regulation changes took kind of a one-size-fits-all approach to the GC zone, where we wanted to increase the number of potential dwelling units per parcel from 2 to some other number. And the proposed height permissive changes and dwelling unit density changes were applied evenly across the entire general commercial zone to make it a general commercial residential zone, a GCR zone. And some of the feedback we received was that while we may not have intended to create an opportunity for maximum height, maximum density in all parts of the general commercial zone, if you make the regulations apply evenly across that zone, you get what you get. And if you make them available to a possible developer, it's tough to say no if you haven't put caps in place. So when we went back to the drawing board in January, the first thing we looked at was, how do we apply this in a way that makes sense, that takes into consideration the public feedback, particularly in the areas of maximum building height, and still takes us down the road of allowing for greater housing density in a way that makes sense for this part of the city. And so what we did is we broke up the general commercial zone. We splintered it into several different new zones and left some of the original GC as it is. So if you see this map in the handout, and it'll come up on the screen in a minute, there are some areas that appear labeled GCR dash a number. There are some spots that are still labeled GC, and the other areas that aren't shown on this map that are further south that are still part of the general commercial zone will still be general commercial zone. Their regulations aren't changing at all. But the meat of the discussion is this northern area and the new zones that we'll be creating with this regulation change. And that's what we want to highlight tonight. So if you look at the map, you see that there's a difference between the east side of Thames Street and the west side of Thames Street. And on the east side of Thames Street, and it wraps around on Bridge, that's labeled GCR-40, the GCR 40 zone. Okay? And on the west side, it's GCR-50. Thank you. The next zone north of Bridge Street is GCR 50.75. Try not to get confusing here, but it'll all make sense in a minute. And you keep going east, you've got a GCR-75. There's one parcel I'll talk about quickly and then leave it. On the west side of North Street, just north of Meridian, it says OS now. That is open space. It's town-owned. It was in the general commercial zone already, but it's open space that can't be developed. It's owned by the town of Groton, not the city of Groton. So we've just changed that to an open space zone. And what's that? It's wetland. It can't be developed. It will always be open space, and end of story there. So it's its own little zone. So that area from Meridian up North Street to the intersection with Bridge will remain general commercial zone. That it's on both sides of the street there for a little bit, and then the other areas, are like I mentioned. So why did we break all these up? The basic element there is maximum building height, and we had to rationalize what maximum building height would look like in transition from the existing neighborhood to a level of density that potential development could net us more dwelling units in some of these larger parcels, 1.5, 2 acre parcels that could handle that kind of increased occupancy. So if you start on Thames Street at Broad, on the east side of the road, the right-hand side of the road there, the GCR 40 zone I don't have the handout, but it'll probably be on the next slide. Essentially, the number after the GCR indicates the maximum height in feet for that zone. Okay? So in the GCR 40, maximum height, 40 feet. GCR 50, maximum height, 50 feet. That's 4 stories. So a maximum of 4 stories on the west side of Thames, that's the downhill side of Thames toward the river. And in that conceptual drawing from the Thames River, the Thames Street study that Paul showed, that's the height that they projected was a 4-story structure on the west side of Thames. That image that they showed actually was a combination of 2 or 3 of the parcels that exist right now, knocking down the 4-story buildings that are already there. So with the new heights, the general commercial zone remains as it is, 35-foot minimum and maximum heights. That's the 2.5-story buildings. There are existing structures already in the GC zone that are that height. GCR 40, like I said, maximum height is 40 feet, 3 full stories. But part of the design element that we are endeavoring to inject into the new regulations is the minimum height concept, which requires new development to meet minimum height requirement, so that you don't end up with 4 stories, 1 story, 4 stories, 1 story. It looks like a bunch of broken teeth. Okay, the idea is that we want to make that sort of, that sense of place where you see buildings that all kind of conform roughly in terms of height, and it feels like a place, and you can see the road and the sidewalks and all those things. And we'll get into much more detail about where the buildings will sit on the properties and that sort of thing, but those are the general height restrictions for potential development. As we said, these are not vacant lots. They have buildings on them already. These new restrictions will apply to new development, we're not currently nursing any applications for anything that would apply here, but we expect that once the regulations change, that potential would come our way. I'm sorry, if you go back just a second, I didn't explain the difference in the zone very well. There's GCR 50, and then there's GCR 50.75. That's our naming convention so that we could tell them apart. On the north side of Bridge Street, east of the underpass under 95. There's a zone there, there's a section of Bridge Street on the north side of the road. We wanted to keep the maximum height 4 stories at the road, but the properties drop off so sharply behind that we conceived that some clever developer might manage to squeeze another couple of stories worth of some development below the street level. So we're restricting the height of the building as you see it on the road to 4 stories, just like the restriction will be on the other side of the street to 3.5 stories. But we wanted to leave room for a clever developer to make use of that terrain, and mixed-use development. Maybe there's some structure below grade that provides some commercial space or even more housing. Whatever they come up with, it's not up to us. But the real restrictions on those parcels are the height at the road and honestly the railroad behind. So they'll have to work out what works in terms of use of the parcel for all that building, required parking, setbacks from the railway area and the road and everything else. So that's GCR 50.75. And then GCR 75 is just that, 75 feet, that's 6 stories. That's the area essentially where the roller rink property is, continuing around to where the current hotel is, and I think the hotel is 4 stories. Okay. So another big question that came out of our last round of regulation change discussions was, what does that mean? What could the maximum impact be? We have a number of things to talk about later regarding the use of a property in terms of how close that building could be to the next building, to the road, to the property behind, all those setbacks. So when we talk about what the maximum number of dwelling units could be, it's basically on a per acre basis. So that doesn't mean that you can get all of these dwelling units on a particular acre, depending on how you carve it up with access road and parking spaces and setbacks and whatnot. Just strictly on a per acre basis, these are the numbers that we came up with. If you squeezed every last possible dwelling unit on a parcel. There are a lot of other considerations, even inside the building, that the building official has to say about, that we don't, about how you carve up the inside of a building and hallways and stairways and those sort of things. So again, absolute maximum. The area of the city we're talking about right now currently has, and I don't have my long distance eyeballs on, but in the lower right hand corner there, that's the total number of current possible dwelling units.
1,277.
Nope, 110.
What's that? At 2 dwelling units per acre, correction, 2 dwelling units per parcel, you have a maximum of 110 dwelling units in the GC zone that we're talking about right now. We break it up with the new regulations and we maximize, you squeeze every last possible dwelling unit in all those parcels, again, most of which are occupied with buildings right now. You could possibly get 1,277 dwelling units in that part of the city. Absolute knockdown, drag out, maximum number. Not likely that you could get all those, but just in terms of a scale of what is the maximum impact, that's it, 1,200 or so dwelling units. All right, thank you.
So I'm going to talk about how we can look, how you're supposed to look and read at the use and permitting table. So you should have a handout that looks like the use and permitting table. So I'm just going to talk about what that looks like and how we can read it. So it's sorry about that. So how to read and use the permitting table. So it's an exhaustive list of uses. So any use that isn't listed there is not permitted. It can't be built if it's not listed there. Each row has either permitted or not permitted use listed on the far left. And each column is a specific zone, one of the zones that Jason just talked about. In columns going from left to right, you have the GC, the GCR 40, the GCR 50, the 50.75, and the 75. And then each row has a heading in dark blue box and white lettering. That's the category of use. In other places in the regs, particularly in parking, we talk a little bit about the categories of use, so that's why those are highlighted there. Go to the next slide. So you can see now on the screen as to what that looks like. You have the category of use at the top in the black, on the dark blue box, the use on that far left column. In the right columns, you have all of the GCR zones, and then the required permits are listed per use per zone in that column. So you'll notice that we have site plan and special permit, and then there's a P. The P means permitted by right. That can just be built. And in X, there's not an X on the screen, but there are X's listed. That means it's not permitted within that zone. So what are the different permits? What do they mean? So by right is a use by right. It does not require review by the city planner or the city commission. There are other requirements to it, obviously, you know, building requirements, building inspection requirements, but as a planning entity, it doesn't have to come to us. A site plan would require an application, a detailed survey, and that has to be reviewed by the city planner and by the planning and zoning board. And then a special permit is similar to a site plan. The main difference is that will have a public hearing aspect to it. So that will have, you know, the public comes in and we take public comments before making a decision. But site plans don't have that limitation. And next slide. So there, how do we make the table? As Jason said when we were talking about sizes, that was a big discussion as well as to what the character of each of the zones would look like and what we think would fit within what's currently there and what we expect or could potentially be there. Another big obstacle we wanted to tackle was avoiding nonconformity. Nonconformity can be a very big thing if they're an existing building and we take their use away, we don't allow that use, we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that all buildings that currently exist, all uses that currently exist are conforming within the new regulations. So you'll notice that there's some oddities within it, in particular the light manufacturing and vehicle dealerships. Light manufacturing is allowed in one GC area, but not allowed in the other ones. That's because there's a sale maker that's considered light manufacturing within that district. We didn't want to make that a non-conforming building, so we wanted to keep that. But it is a special permit, so there's a heavy barrier to entry for future potential development in light manufacturing in that area. Same with vehicle dealership. Within that district, within that zone, there's already a use that is considered a vehicle district, a vehicle dealership, and we didn't want to make them a nonconformity. And then, again, promotion of consistency with what works per the location. And one of the considerations with that was some uses look very similar on the outside. So when we were talking about that, we wanted to talk more about the footprint of the building and less about the use, how much square footage the use would use and how much parking is required. That was really what the conversation was. If we can go back a slide, sorry. 2 slides. Thank you. You'll notice that the businesses and the retail are divided like that. We don't have specific businesses listed under that business and personal service category. We have square footage listed because those buildings would look very similar no matter what the use is, so long as they fit within that category of use. And it's really just a question of how big it's going to be, how much parking is going to be required based on that square footage. So that was the big consideration as to why some of those are divided like that. And we can go back to the other slide. And that's all set.
All right, so now we're going to move on to the parking and transportation aspect of our updates. So the parking aspect of this is added as section 7.2. So this only addresses the GCR and GC zones that we've been talking about. It has 2 main goals. We wanted to simplify the existing regulations so that it's clear to both commissioners and developers what is required of them, and also to facilitate the goals of the plan of conservation. And I titled this Parking and Transportation because the way that we address parking and design will also affect the way that people transport themselves. So next slide, thanks. So in line with the POCD, we have safe transportation goals, human scale development, which we've been talking about, mixed use, dense development, and then that view shed and public zone, the way that it looks with building heights and things like that. So that has to do, that relates to our parking in that we'll be requiring parking to be behind buildings and things like that. So I'll go into the details of how we address these goals. But we were looking at these specific things as we were going through our regulation updates. Live, work, play development, mixed transportation mode choices. So we have addressing biking, walking, buses, and cars, as well as protecting the public and residential view sheds. So these are the updates listed on the left, and on the right you see how they address the different goals that we just talked about. On the left, we required certain drive aisle widths, turning radiuses for private driveways and roadways, and also a minimum number of curb cuts per parcel. So this is all to support a more walkable, more human-scaled development approach. This also promotes safety in that fewer curb cuts and slower speeds allow for cars and pedestrians and bicyclists to interact in a more safe environment. Parking location requirements, as I mentioned before, we're requiring all parking to be located in the back of a building, and also to be, it could be even inside A building, in the case of the GCR 75 or 50 to 75, you might have it below grade even. The shared parking factor we'll talk about more in the next slide. There is a whole section on that in your handout, and I'll go through how you can read that, those tables, but that really supports the live, work, play development, the mixed use, which basically gives developers an incentive to build in a more more mixed use way on each parcel. There's buffer requirements so that our public and residential zones are protected from views of surface parking lots. And there's bicycle parking accommodation now so that we can support that mixed modes of transportation. So this is the shared parking factor. This is used all over Connecticut. It was developed by the same people who developed the SMART code. They're on version 9.2, and they're a planning company who has tested this, and we can now incorporate it into our zoning code. I have up here an example that's very, very simple. There's a couple more in-depth examples included in the zoning code itself. I'll walk through this example with you here and talk through some of the benefits of this. The main goal of this is to say that is to use land more efficiently. So if you have two uses that either have shared clientele, so you might have one person who comes to both an office and a restaurant, or a retail and an office, so that's one car for those two places, or they have differing peak demands. So you might have a restaurant that's mostly used in the evening, and an office that's used during the day. So this shared parking factor allows the maximum usage of the parking. So in this example, I'll just go through it really quick. If you have a dentist office that has 1,000 square feet, in the table it's above, on the right-hand side, you have the requirement of 2 spaces per 1,000 square feet. So that's 2 parking spaces required for that office. For the restaurant, there's almost 3,000 square feet. You'll need about 8 parking spaces, and that's a total of 10 parking spaces if these were on separate parcels. But if they're on the same parcel, in the same building, so a developer could take advantage of this shared parking factor and go to this odd-looking square on the left-hand side, and where retail and office meet, there's a little green box around 1.2. That's your shared factor, and that can be applied by dividing your total number of parking by your factor, and then that's where you get 10 divided by 1.2 equals about 8 motor vehicle spaces. So you have a 20% reduction in requirements for those shared uses, and then the bicycle parking requirement would be added after that, and so there's 1 bike space required. So that's how that would be applied. The other thing that this doesn't necessarily address, but our regulations address that for all residential parking, those must be met on the parcel. So in order to meet the parking requirement for all residential dwellings, they have to be included in that zone. Parcel, excuse me. You wouldn't be able to utilize on-street parking for residential. So that concludes the parking regulations.
Okay, I am not going to read this all to you. I imagine everybody's eyes are spinning a little bit right now. Sorry. But what I wanted to talk about initially is the fact that the plan of all of the ideas that we've been talking about, whether it's this meeting, this PowerPoint, or over the last couple of years in meetings that many of you have been to, is we've been talking about things that have been included in the Plan of Conservation and Development. They're all ideas for how to make the city a better place. And a better place for everybody, whether you're walking, whether you're biking, whether you have kids, whether you are differently abled, whether you handle steep hills well or not. and ways to moderate things that are going on in the city and put things in the city in places that people can get to. And so on the one hand, so that we're looking at the designing for a Main Street neighborhood idea, a feel of a Main Street neighborhood, mostly along Bridge Street and on into the upper block or two of down to Broad Street on Thames Street. So how do we design places that feel like neighborhoods without making them cartoon sets, without making it Disney? So understanding that there's a difference between properties that are owned by the public and properties that are owned privately. There are property rights that go with each of those. And the Plan of Conservation and Development has, and I think as Paul mentioned earlier, in at least 11 fairly easy places to find, it talks about how to develop this area of the city. It talks about encouraging and requiring certain things that make, design elements that make places feel more comfortable. And I'll give you just one quick example. If you're male, you may not realize this, but women don't feel safe if they're walking by a blank wall, if they're walking by more than 30 feet at the most of dense shrubbery. There are things that you need to keep in mind in terms of designing areas that are going to feel safe for everyone. So let's go to the next one. And just, by the way, all of these, this PowerPoint is going to be online by tomorrow. So everything we're talking about tonight will be online in the next 24 hours if it's not there already. So how do you create a neighborhood? What are some of the design principles that we look at to really look at how to create a place that feels comfortable for people? Okay, because we design neighborhoods for people, not for cars. We design neighborhoods for kids, for the elderly, for people to live in and feel comfortable and at least know their neighbors if they're not, you know, close friends with them or whatever, but at least to allow those serendipitous connections to take place. So there are neighborhood and corridor best practices. I have spared you most of them here. But forming identifiable areas that encourage residents and property owners to take responsibility for maintenance and evolution. So if you live in a neighborhood, you know your neighbors, and you're walking down the street to, you know, walk your kid to the bus stop, and you see some trash on the sidewalk, if you feel connected to that place, you're more likely to pick that up. It should be compact. Everything should be within a 5 to 10 minute walk. That's between a quarter of a mile and a half a mile. Corner stores, you can go pick up milk. You know, a walk around that feels like you've, you know, at least gotten some exercise. You know, having those multiple different kinds of routes. How do you set these places up so that you feel like you've done a circuit? Having things be mixed use. It's fun to go window shopping. Most of us don't want to go out and spend money every day, but if we know that there are small shops around and we can walk by them and just look in the window and wave to the shop owner and have that kind of familiarity, those are the kinds of things that make us feel like we actually exist in a place and that we're part of it and we know the other people that are part of it. So allowing for that mixed use, not requiring it, Currently, the zoning regulations say that you can't have residential units on the first floor. There's no reason for that. That guarantees that that building is going to have to come down if somebody wants to do something different. So having the ability to keep existing buildings, keep new buildings for a long, long time, and have the uses change within them, that's what gives a place a sense of history. How many times do you hear people refer to storefronts here as, oh, that's the old such and such? And there's a feeling of, you know, I belong here. I knew that when, or my parents talked about that. So creating that kind of glue that keeps us feeling like we're a part of this place. Daily living occurs within walking distance, allowing independence, particularly to elderly and the young, and differently abled. The idea of kids being able to walk down the street to visit their best friend who lives, you know, a block and a half or 2 blocks away, or depending upon their age, you know, more or less, that has become something that parents have become afraid to let their kids do. Or they have to stand there and watch their kid go down the 2 blocks. And if there's a curve in the street and you can't see your kid get to that house, all of a sudden it becomes this, it becomes an issue that you have to pay an awful lot of attention to. Most parents, you know, there's a lot of consternation that can come with that. However, if you feel like you are sure that you know the neighbors that live on your street, if you're in a neighborhood, if you've created a neighborhood where people can see and you know that there is, that neighbors down the street know your kids, and your kids know them. If, you know, an adult falls on the street, you know, or on the sidewalk, and your kid is walking by, they will reach out and say, hey, you know, can I help you? So creating those kinds of social connections and the confidence that you can count on people that are around you. I'm not trying to be Pollyanna-ish about this. It's not about being everything everywhere. It's not everybody is going to do all of these things, but enough of them. And you can do things physically that help make a neighborhood lean toward that. Broad range of housing types and price levels that serve a range of diverse ages, races, and incomes, allowing a citizenry with a range of skills to build and support personal and civic bonds. It's sort of what I was just talking about, essential to an authentic community. So all of these ways that we can make a community feel authentic. Also, a range of parks, tot lots, waterfront access can also help define and connect different neighborhoods. One of the things that we did when we split up, let's go to the next. When we looked at splitting up the GC zone was really trying to create places that had more nuance and places that had more definition and could be identified as they're not all the same, okay? So looking at how to develop great streets is actually one of the best ways to develop a neighborhood. We'll talk about housing and buildings in a minute. But to develop great streets, among other things, making them pedestrian and bike friendly, and I have to say that one of the things that keeps coming up at meetings is no one will ride their bike. People don't really ride bikes. That's just, you know, there's some people out there that do, but most people don't. Well, it turns out that the difference between who will ride a bike and who won't is actually age 40. If you're under age 40, you have a strong preference for riding bikes, not universally, but you have a lot of people who want to ride bikes. People who are over 40 tend not to want to ride bikes on public streets. I looked this up because it just wasn't making sense to me that nobody wanted to ride bikes. So making places feel comfortable for people to travel, without their cars. Building close to the street, introducing front porches, windows and doors that convey safe spaces. If you feel like you can be seen by people in a building, you're going to feel safer on a street. If you're on a street and there are people in a building who have windows, who can open their windows, who have porches, screen doors, those are the kinds of things where sound can travel and vision can travel. Doesn't mean that you're leering in your neighbor's house. It just means that you feel that connection. You've designed it so that those connections can happen. The next is street trees, on-street parking, awnings, protecting pedestrians from harsh weather. One of the things that we have found is that, people say nobody walks on Thames Street. Well, generally speaking, nobody walks on Thames Street because if you're walking in the middle of the summer, it's blistering hot and there's no shade for a long stretch. If you're trying to walk even on Bridge Street, it's the same thing. There's nothing that protects you. So awnings, having buildings that come out that have an arcade below so that you can walk through, and that, you do your window shopping there, pick up your chocolate chip cookie at a bakery, or see something that, maybe there's a meeting room on the first floor of an apartment building. All of those uses can change in that first floor, but it allows you, if you have an arcade or you have an awning, it gives that shade, protection from the snow, protection from the rain. Be amazed at what that does. Street trees also make pedestrians feel safer when they are planted in the grass strip between a sidewalk and the street. People feel like they're protected. There are also, and this is statistically verified, cars go slower. People talk about the speedway of Thames Street. There are pretty basic ways to slow that traffic down. And there are many different solutions for different parts of that street. Same thing with, and it doesn't mean that just because the traffic is going fewer miles an hour doesn't mean that you are not getting from A to B pretty much as fast as you would be if you were going faster, because if you're going faster, you usually have to you stop quickly at a stoplight or a stop sign. Stop signs for sure, and the police chief will back me up on this. Stop signs actually make traffic go faster and it's more dangerous because people get annoyed that they had to stop for a stop sign, so they go faster when they're ready to go. Next. Okay, dimensional standards. So how do we make all of these things happen other than just, planting trees in the tree belt that in some cases doesn't exist, or other tools? So there's one page, and you all have it in your handout. The first column, not the dark blue, but the first column after the dark blue is the GC zone as it is now and as it will continue to be where the GC zone exists. So those areas, nothing will change. The next is the GC 40, where that's up to 3 stories. That's 5 feet more than what is currently allowed. just so we're clear on what we're talking about here. And those numbers are, if you look at the diagrams on the left, we measure things, we decided to measure things in slightly different ways than are traditionally done in some zoning regulations. For instance, we talk about layers, and that means areas measured from the street going backward. So layer 1 is the distance from the back of typically the back of a sidewalk to the facade of a building, in front of a building. What is that distance? Colleen has talked about having that be not an area for parking. Okay, in some cases we do allow handicapped parking there, but that gets into the technical stuff of dealing with the design of a single parcel. The goal is to have multiple buildings build what we refer to as a street wall, but it's not a wall. It's a series of buildings that help enclose the street and make that public space feel comfortable. So that's one of the tools that we look at, and how wide how the greater distance between those two facades on opposite sides of the street gives you a different sense of safety and a different sense of connection to having that neighborhood main street that I'd mentioned earlier. Layer 2 is where the building goes, and layer 3 is where your trash and your parking and things that you don't want on your front lawn or in the first layer that just doesn't help, it doesn't add, it detracts from a neighborhood. Looking at setbacks, we all know we have setbacks from your lot lines, and in some cases, they're different in each of the different zones, and that changes the feel and the nature of each of the zones that we've divided the GC zone, the current GC zone into. The closer you have houses together, or buildings together, sometimes that can feel very comfortable. Sometimes it's like, oh, my neighbor's looking in my kitchen window all the time. My neighbors happen to live 12 feet away from me, and we never have conversations out the window, only outside. On the bottom left-hand corner, building types by location. We have situations where we might have an apartment building that may have a pool and a pool house. Well, what is that pool house? Where does it go? And what is the nature of the pool house itself? How does it contribute to making those outdoor spaces feel like they belong to part of a neighborhood, even if that neighborhood is sort of a micro neighborhood of an apartment building? And then there's how we measure height, and we measure height in a couple of different ways, which is common in Connecticut. If it's a flat roof, you measure it one way. If it's a sloped roof, you measure it another way. It's all based on the number of feet, not the stories. We put stories into the charts so that everybody could sort of have a sense of what does that mean. But it's measured, in fact, by the number of feet. It's a number. Next, please. So going back to the map that you've now seen a few times and you have in your hands, each of these areas is slightly different from others. And if you look at it, the numbers tend to get bigger as you go to the right, and they slope up. Not literally on a slope, but the idea is that they transition. And one of the issues that we have here is a lack of what's called by planners missing middle housing. And that's generally buildings up to about 3 or 4 stories, depending upon where you are. And so we're looking at making that transition up to the possibility of 6 stories in a way that is responsive to the terrain. As Jason mentioned earlier, the limit to the height of buildings on the street. So if you're driving down Bridge Street, the maximum height would be 4 stories. Okay, so you can't, you may go from, and the minimum height is 2 stories. So that you have that flex, it doesn't look like a monolith, however, it gives you that sense of containment. You feel like you're in a place. Next. So, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Okay. This is looking south on Thames Street. We get calls from people who come in. It's very interesting. People come in and say, "Oh, I'm thinking about buying this." Like, have you talked to the owner yet? No, but I think I'm going to buy it, you know. Okay. That happens frequently. And so and why do they think that? They think that because there's a lot of space here. There are no buildings that have a lot of activity going on. So what can we do with this? You know, how do you do this? Well, this is one way you could do it. This is one way that you could this is that site. You could build buildings, and you could build them 1 at a time, 2 at a time, do a phased project so that it's not a huge issue or not as big an issue as undertaking a huge building project for a developer. Or you could build it all at once. These are things that are not, that's not our call, whether it's a phased development. That's up to the developer. But wouldn't that be a fun place to walk down? Wouldn't that be a great place to sit down and, you know, rest your legs? You get some shade from buildings, you get some shade from the trees, you get some shade from the balconies that come out. So these are all elements that are going toward not just making a building, but making a place. Next. So we are looking at doing a couple of other renderings of places in the GC zone that we will be presenting when we go forth with an application. And our goal is to make places that people want to exist in. Okay. We're gonna.
Yeah, so we'll take a 10-minute recess, and if anybody has any questions, please write them down, and we'll collect them and do our best to answer them. So we'll be back at 8 o'clock.
You want to mention to people online again?
Oh, yeah, and I'm sorry, and people on the Zoom, if you have questions, please put them in the chat.
Yeah. Staring right at the,
Paul said, be careful.
staring at the projector.
Be careful
You
when
gotta
you
be
stand up.
Colleen's taking them all. Leslie's got,
I have two.
I got a couple, okay.
sure if that's what we intended for this answer period, but sure. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Well, that was a conceptual error last time. We had people that thought that the city was going to raise all the current buildings and build maximum, it's just not how it works, but. A few questions on the chat.
Thank God I have Sierra. Otherwise I'd have to be an octopus. Thank you.
All right. We back recording? We're good? All right, it's 8 o'clock, so thanks everybody who gave us questions. Are there any other questions anybody has that they'd like to get answered tonight? All right, we've got a few, and we've kind of split them up to people who've got expertise in how to answer them. So, Leslie, you want to start with the ones you got?
Sure. What plan, if any, for continued communication between current owners of affected parcels in these zones and any potential future developers? If parcels are not available, nothing can be developed. And then I just want to read one other question because it's related, and then I'll answer them together. When people come in and say they're interested in a site but have not talked to the owner, what has happened? Did they talk to the owner, and why no sale? And there's some related questions to that one, which I will also address. So there are lots of pieces of a puzzle that go into developing land, and not everybody gets to have a say over everything. Some people don't get to have a say over anything, or it's limited. Anybody who wants, first of all, anybody who wants to find out who a property owner is, often it'll be an LLC if it's a sizable and developed portion, but you can find out who the owner is. And there are developers that have come in to talk to us and wanted to know if there were any plans. We are very, we talk about things like the POCD. We talk about discussions that we have about the zoning regulations, but we can't make anybody develop. We can't make anybody sell their land, and we can't tell somebody to go buy somebody's land if it's not for sale. That's just not, it's the wrong forum, okay? It doesn't mean that it isn't an issue. We know, we've heard about it. We will we can help facilitate those connections if it makes, if we know that somebody's interested in selling and somebody else is interested in buying, we can help facilitate it. But our job as representatives and servants of taxpayers in the city, that doesn't fall under our purview, okay? So there are ways to do it. It's just the Planning and Zoning Commission and yours truly, the city planner, we're not the best vehicle for that, and in some cases, we're not the vehicle for that at all. Often, Sierra, as the head of economic development, if somebody calls, I'll put them in touch with her. She often knows more about sort of the nitty-gritty, what's going on the ground, and is a good person to help facilitate those connections when it makes sense. There are plenty of times when it doesn't make sense. And there are plenty of times that people will come in and say, I'm going to buy this, like I said before, I'm going to buy this piece of property and I'm going to, I want to know what the city wants to do with it. Well, that's not how it works. Nothing
Leslie,
can,
I'm sorry, I guess there's one thing I would add to that, and that's that, the regulations can enable things to happen, but we don't force anything to happen.
Right.
I mean, that's.
They can, we're hoping that some of these changes will work as incentivizing people to either develop or sell, develop.
Is it fair to say, I think we brought this up at the last round of public hearings, that you've had potential developers come in and talk about what they thought they would want to do, and the regulations that are currently in place have been stifling to that end because they wanted to do things that the regulations didn't permit.
Absolutely, and that's probably the biggest impetus to changing these regulations. As has been mentioned a couple of times tonight, right now the zoning regulations only allow 2 dwelling units per parcel. If a in the GC zone, if the parcel is 3 feet by 3 feet, or the parcel is 3 acres, only 2 parcels. That's, in my professional opinion, ludicrous.
It's on.
It's on. Yep.
You couldn't hear me? Oh, okay.
Okay. Let me go through these other questions. How do you persuade the 2 or 3 property owners who control so much land on Thames Street and to get with the program? Honestly, we're hoping that incentivizing those property owners by allowing them to build more than 2 dwelling units during a time of housing shortage when developers are looking to build multifamily housing. We're trying to take advantage of the economic trends that are going on right now. We see housing going up all over the place, and it's still not enough. So that's one piece. Another piece is we meet with different property owners and different developers, not to scheme about things. They call us, they want to meet with us, want to know what's going on, and we want to make it clear. And as I've been told, I don't know this from firsthand experience, but I've been told it hasn't always been an easy place to do business. And that is the reputation of Groton, of the city of Groton, and we're doing everything we can to change that. Not to let people get away with things, but to help the best things happen. So that's one piece. And frankly, if people like the people they have to deal with in City Hall, they're more inclined to think favorably about doing projects here. There are no guarantees. We're doing the best we can on as many fronts as we can. If these people are going to keep sitting on their property, how do we get around that? We can't build on somebody's property. It's just not the right forum. We do explore things. It's one of the reasons that Sierra and I are together in one department. Planning and economic development often are separate departments, and we have found that it has been just an incredible partnership. Has this reality ever been part of the planning and zoning discussion? I will tell the Planning and Zoning Commission if someone asks that, I've been asked whether any developers are secretly interested, and do I have a deal under the table? The answer is an emphatic no, under no circumstances. But also, do developers and property owners come in to talk to me? Yeah, absolutely. That's part of what I'm here for. That's part of my job, is to let them know what kinds of things can happen, what kinds of things can't happen, what kinds of things, asking what would they like to happen, what would they like to see. And then one more, also explaining to them what the Planning and Zoning Commission can and cannot do. It's one of the reasons we led off with what can zoning do and what can zoning not do. A question about side setbacks. Is a 0-foot side setback going to be a problem for lots that share a border and potentially could block each other? You can't landlock a property owner. It's why all the plans do come through us. And the reason that we put the 0 lot line option in, if you look at the charts that you have, you'll see there's a range. Your side yard setbacks can be, in some places, 0, I forgot the numbers already, but, say 0 to 12, as an example. It's enough that you can put a driveway through to the back to get to parking, but if you want to build buildings that are touching each other, and by the way, there are lots of those. People talk about how much they love Thames Street. If you go down Thames Street, there are a lot of buildings that are right next. They often have a party wall. They share that, so they share a wall. That's how a 0 lot line setback works. And so yes, it can work. It's a design. It becomes a design question, and you can't block somebody's entrance. Somebody else doesn't have the right to use, unless there are easements and all kinds of other things, but they don't have the right to use your property to get to the back of their property unless you have allowed that. So some of these, it's a little bit like what are they, those cubes? Rubik's Cubes. It's a little bit, it can be a little bit like that, and part of my job is I get to play, and I get to figure out solutions to problems.
Part of the way that we discussed the 0 setback on the side was that it wasn't so much a way of squeezing one neighbor against the other, but it just allowed for more use of the frontage of a property, more options. If the idea is to bring the frontage of the buildings, the facade of the building towards the street and put parking behind, but you only have so much, roadside frontage, and you have to be able to get to the back, then maybe it makes sense to scooch the building to the edge of the property line and allow the driveway to be on the other side. So it's just, it doesn't mean you have to build right up against the last blade of grass. It just allows for more property possibilities.
Okay, I will address the next questions. kind of transitioning from this talk about what can zoning do, we got a question on whether these plans take into account the neglected and unoccupied buildings. And like Leslie said, we can't do anything very directly about those, but in redoing these regulations, the hope is that it now becomes economically feasible to redevelop those lots. So it's really a incentive, and it's a financial and development forward new regulation. So that's how we're addressing the unoccupied buildings. We're really hoping that with these mixed use areas, we can make it financially feasible to redevelop. Next, zoning. So I have a question about zoning doesn't oversee traffic and safety, but the city government as a whole needs to address higher density concerns. And so from a traffic and safety perspective, the higher density in this area is not, it wasn't chosen randomly. Like, this area is somewhere where there are 4-seat bus stops already. There's 25-mile-an-hour roads surrounding the area so that biking and walking are very feasible without much change to the existing roadways. You'll see some people are biking and walking already. And those things, as we develop this area and as we build the buildings closer to the streets, those are all actually aspects that will slow traffic, will increase yielding to pedestrians and biking, will make it clearer who has the right of way in certain intersections and locations. So all of these regulations actually passively impact the traffic and safety. So the answer is yes, we're addressing those higher density traffic safety concerns, but it's a little bit more nuanced than just saying, we're putting more stop signs in. Another question that we have is about the location of parking. So I had mentioned earlier that you could have a subgrade parking structure, but I didn't mention all the other types of parking structures that are allowed. But basically, any parking structure, parking lot, we want a developer would like to develop can be developed as long as it's behind the front portion of the building. The other aspect of that is that there are requirements for buffering between lots. So we don't have a setback for buildings, but we do have those for parking lots. So if you have a parking lot, you have to have a certain landscape buffer depending on the size and depending on the adjacent parcel usage. So we're encouraging like green space and protection of view sheds by requiring buffering. Another question is about the parking lot. Is there going to be enough parking? Right? We're asking for higher density. We're saying that more people can develop in this area, and we already have parking problems in Groton. Right? We know this. But the thought behind this is that with the proximity to major employers, capturing that commuter population, we're actually going to be lowering the amount of external cars that are coming into this area. We're also going to encourage people to walk to the corner store, like Leslie was saying. There'll be places where you might be able to grab a snack or go to your dentist, and you don't have to take your car. Or someone who wants to walk will feel safe walking or feel safe biking. Someone under 40 can just bike to work. We are really trying to address the issue of housing in this area, and we care more about housing than we do about making sure that everyone will have a parking space who lives here. But it's more important that developers can develop the residential density than that we're trying to make sure that 50 million cars can fit in there, because that's not the type of place that this is going to be, right? This is our main street, this is our walkable, dense area. And part of that is taken into account with the uses that we allow. So we don't allow businesses that are heavy on drive-throughs, businesses that are heavy on car clientele, really. This is all about building that neighborhood feel. Another question is about if the parking requirements. If a parcel is shaped in a way that's close to the main road, can it be used for parking? And then can you use a separate parcel for parking? So I'm going to address this in a little bit of a nuanced way too. and forgive me if I get the question meaning wrong, but we're allowing parcels to be used for parking as long as they meet the requirements for landscape buffering, and they meet the uses. The other thing that we're requiring is that if you go above the required parking, that the additional parking spaces need to be pervious. So that's to address the stormwater floodplain sort of issues that we're having in Groton in the waterfront. The other aspect of this question is, can you use a separate parcel for parking? And there is a clause that allows, say, a church to share parking with something else, with another parcel, if there's an agreement between the two, and that other parcel needs to be within 500 feet of the main use. So we're not allowing someone to say, well, it's okay, I have a parking lot 3 miles away. There's a lot of provisions to make sure that the parking that is required is met within a very reasonable amount of distance from that use. And that's it for my questions.
So I got a question. Will special use permits be allowed for submission in areas that are not in this proposed northern Thames Street area? Yes, there are areas in the town that aren't part of this plan that already allow special permits, that will continue to allow special permits as they're listed in the regulations. Those aren't changing. Anything outside of this Thames Street area is not changing. Everything we've talked about tonight is related to that Thames Street area that we highlighted earlier. And if so, would these proposed regulation changes be applicable if approved to the special use permit, or would you have to wait until other parts of Groton zoning is updated? Again, these are only related to the zones that we've talked about on the map tonight in that northern Thames Street area. So it does not affect areas, say, by the beach or in other places in the city. It doesn't affect those.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's something that maybe has been lost in the presentations we've done so far, that the regulation changes that we're talking about are just for this northern part of the general commercial zone. We're splitting it up into these purposeful general commercial residential zones. It's not affecting any of the rest of the waterfront zone or the rest of the residential zones, but some of the details that we're not pouring over right now are updating the language in the rest of the regulations to Connecticut best practices, national best practices, kind of unifying the terminology that you use for this type of use or structure, so that it's even out throughout the whole set of regulations. And eventually we're going to apply these upgrades to the rest of the zones, but we do this one zone at a time. Because it requires this application and public hearing. So we're debuting these changes in this zone for these good reasons that we're presenting, with the idea that we're establishing some good best practices within the city regulations, so that when we address other zones to see where we can make improvements there, we're going to bring them all up to kind of a standard of language and a standard of requirements and things that make sense.
I have one more.
You got it? You have another one?
I have one more,
Okay.
and then whatever they're, yep, we're all good on those? Okay, great. So one other question. The north end of Thames Street is not an opportunity zone or new market tax credit zone. Have there been discussions about locally investing, incentivizing owners and developers to take action? We're always up for creating, incentivizing the things that we want. The first step is to figure out what it is that everybody wants, and that's where, again, as we said at the very beginning of this meeting, we took very seriously what everybody has said in a whole variety of meetings, not the least of which were the hearings of last winter, but also going back before that. We had workshops. We met at Thames Street Park during COVID because we could. It was the only place we could meet. There were, we've had lots and lots of meetings and lots of discussions, and all the times that you all, you're coming in to do one thing, to, pay your water bill, and you run into me or Sierra in the lobby, and you have a conversation, we're paying attention. We're listening to all of those things. The arc that is North Ames Street and over Bridge Street is part of the TIF district. That is it does exist, it is part of it, and it's slowly building up funds. It's just not really enough to do anything with quite yet. Do we have anything else?
Other questions? Anybody? Yeah, let's stick with
We're trying to keep the,
this way we'll have the notes.
while we're waiting for that. Jill has one. So. Sure.
Yeah.
One thing I just do want to make clear is that the PowerPoint will be online, that if you're under 40, make sure you have a bicycle.
You're also going to put a copy of the new proposed regulations online, right? So the regulations
They're on,
that...
actually. They're on now.
They're on already, right?
Yeah, they've been on.
So the regulation, the text amendment and the map change that will be submitted for public hearing will be available online or are available online now. So you have a chance to absorb it between now and the time we actually hold the public hearing.
Can you explain how to find the regs and the proposed changes on the website?
Yes? Give me a minute.
Sure.
Talk amongst yourselves.
Why don't we we want to talk about next steps? Yeah, why don't we do that while we're getting the last questions in? So, all right, where do we go from here? So we've done our informational meeting. Next thing that we'll do is we'll talk about having a formal proposal submitted for the text amendment and the map update, and we're actually going to talk about that later this evening. Then of course, there'll be a public hearing about that, and there's a bunch of steps in terms of we have to notify the Council of Governments and provide the application to the city clerk and things like that. But we'll have a public hearing. We'll, depending on the discussion tonight, we'll set a date for that public hearing, and so everyone will be aware. And then we'll hold the public hearing. Then we'll deliberate on it and make a decision about whether we go forward or not based on the input we get at the public hearing.
That would be great. Okay. Sierra's going to pull the website link up and put it up here. It looks like it's on the home page, public information meeting. If you scroll down from the public information meeting notice, you'll come to the regulations and the website. Okay. Have you met with the two major property owners? to find out what they would like to see. Yes, many times.
Could you share with us what it is they would like to see?
I actually,
What they want to see.
I actually would, there is an interest in looking at multifamily housing, and they understand, you know, they've heard what people's complaints and concerns are, and we've talked about ways around, you know, trying to finesse that. Again, part of my job is to help take all of those puzzle pieces and either put them together or pull them apart, and strongly suggest you do some cross-sections to better show high impacts. In terms of view corridors, I'm making the assumption that that's what this is. We are doing we have hired somebody who's doing renderings for us. You saw the beginnings of one of them, and there are a minimum of 2 more coming. And to show what could be, what it doesn't have to be. I know there were some meetings where people were talking about, oh, you want to build a wall of apartment buildings or high-rise. That is not the only solution. That is not the only answer to building multifamily housing. So we're looking at and all of those applications would require a public hearing.
I just think cross-sections is a more effective means. If people are concerned about height, showing a pretty picture like you did this evening, that's lovely.
I actually have one.
Great. I just think that it's very inexpensive to do. You probably do it in-house in the office. Just to show what the allowed maximum height is versus, let's say, Larry Chesley's buildings, or what some things that look like.
I have one.
All right, anything else? Sierra, you were going to,
Or basically, if you're on the main website, which is cityofgroton.com, right now, if you scroll down, you'll notice the public information meeting. Once you click on that, it will bring down the explanation, and you'll notice links on the side of each section, the map, and then later on within the next 24 hours, we will also upload the PowerPoint and the recording of this meeting so that you guys can.
all right, that clear to everybody? How to find it? Thanks, Sarah. All right, anything else?
We have other business, but
Yeah.
done here.
Yeah, so we're ready to move on to next item on the agenda is
Actually, can I just,
Yep,
one thing?
sure.
There will be a hard copy of the proposed zoning regulations for anybody who either doesn't have a computer or is more comfortable looking at a hard copy that will be available for people to look at here. One copy will be with the city clerk in the city clerk's office here, and then there will be another copy that we are going to bring to Bill Memorial Library. And if there's any other place that people can think of that would be good places that have public access for people to look at, let me know and we'll print another one.
All right. Thanks, everybody. You're welcome to stay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for coming, and I appreciate the input and your interest. We ready to move on? All right. So next item is approval of minutes. We've got minutes of the October 16th, 2024 regular meeting. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Rusk, second by...
Second.
Is that Colleen seconding? All right. All right. Anybody have any changes? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor of approving those minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right, those minutes are approved, 5-0-0. Next, we have the October 29th, 2024 special meeting, the minutes from that. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Motion from Mr. James,
Second.
second by Mr. Rusk. Anybody have any changes on those? All right, hearing none, so all those in favor of approving the minutes from October 20th, 2024 special meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? That's right, okay. That motion is approved 501. I'm sorry, 401, and Colleen abstained. All right, we had, last month, we did not approve the September 17th meeting minutes, and we deferred that to this meeting. They're not on the agenda, but I don't know if we have the updated minutes.
I don't have anything I haven't sent you.
Okay, so we don't have the,
After we had the meeting, I sent the updated minutes to you. Okay, let's defer it to the next meeting.
all right, so do we need to vote on it, or can we just table it till the,
Just do it.
Yeah.
all right, we'll table it to the December meeting. All right, then the regular meeting we've got discussion of the zoning regulation amendments, possible authorization to submit the applications, and we've got a 824 referral. We also had a public hearing that we opened in October
Resiliency.
for the text amendment to the POCD,
Right.
and that's, so,
And I respectfully request that you table that you vote to add it to the agenda, number one, because it's not on the agenda. Add it to the agenda and
continue it.
continue it to the regularly scheduled meeting in January.
I move that we add to the agenda for tonight's meeting the discussion on the text amendment to the POCD regarding resiliency.
All right, there's a motion from Mr. Rusk. Is there a second?
I second it.
Second from Mr. James. All right, any further discussion on that motion? So, all those in favor of adding it to the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, so that's, adding it to the agenda is approved 5-0-0. All right, and then we're gonna table it, right? We're gonna continue it.
Yes, continue it to the next regularly scheduled
You
Planning
wanna
and
s-
Zoning Commission meeting
In January?
in January
Not December?
to be held in council chambers beginning at 6:30. You don't have to take it up at 6:30, you just can't take it up before 6:30. So, date and time certain.
Okay.
All right, so is there a motion to continue public hearing TA POCD number 24-1 to the January 2025 regularly scheduled meeting?
So moved.
Motion from Mr. Rusk. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Mrs. Lothrop. All those in favor of continuing that public hearing to January 2025 meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right, let's continue to January, 5-0-0. All right. Thanks for helping me clean that up. Let's see, discussion of the regulation amendments. So Leslie, what do you, based on what we heard tonight, I didn't hear a lot of concerns raised, right, about, there was we're, I think we've done a really good job of taking the feedback we got at the last public hearings and incorporating that into a new proposal. And, it seems to me like it would make sense to move forward with it. I think there's still maybe a couple of typos that might need to be cleaned up, but, Leslie, I know you were struggling with the actual document, right?
Yes, and I'm very happy that despite the agony that it was for you and Sue to sit through that with me, that you actually saw that it was terrible. I will say that I did talk to someone who is an expert in Microsoft Word, and she went through a few things with me that were not, she said she's never seen a document that was this tangled. So it's had a lot of hands on it in the last few years, and it seems that there is there's definitely a need to just straight type it. And so I'm committed to looking into that after this meeting is over. The goal was to get through tonight first. So we will straight type exactly what we have now in the proposal, unless you all, typos aside, that's the kind of thing. Typos, you're not changing the meaning or the words. It has been a yeoman's effort.
My only concern is in terms of revision control, that we have a proposed set of regulation changes posted, and yeah, but I mean, we have our proposed set posted online right now, and we'll need to make sure that whatever the straight type redo is. Okay, understood. So that straight type redo will follow adoption or desertion of the amendment after the public hearing.
And we will be very transparent about all of that.
Got it. I move that we submit application for the zoning amendment and map amendment as described in this meeting and as reviewed by this commission.
All right, there's a motion by Mr. Rusk. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second from Mr. James. All right, is there any discussion on the motion?
Yeah, the feedback that I've received tonight was positive in that the presentation itself was an upgrade from our last public hearing attempt, that it answered the public's demand for more saturation, more transparency, more upfront information, and this is obviously this effort. We've been thinking about this for a long time. I think this effort tonight, the folks that attended, the folks that are going to watch this later online, I think this answered the mail on providing communication. The information is going to be provided online. We showed how to get to that, and there will be at least a month until our public hearing in which the public is able to absorb this information, and then come prepared to the public hearing, with substantive questions and comments. And I think that we've just done this better this time. I mean, we had great intentions last time, but our feedback was real, and it was taken to heart. So I think that this approach is better, and I'm interested to hear, any kind of technical feedback that we get from folks who will have had, this upcoming month or so to absorb it. But so I'm looking forward to the next public hearing because I think we've prepared the public a lot better.
Thank you. Any other comments? I certainly think that you've summarized it well, Jason. I think we've been through it, and we've cleaned it up. Got a much done a much better job of presenting it to the public. do we need a separate vote on the text amendment and the map?
Yeah, they're two different applications.
Then I amend my motion to include the zoning amendment.
So is that the text amendment and the map?
The
is
text,
one-
the text amendment. We'll make a separate motion for the map.
Okay, so this is, this is to submit the text amendment application, correct?
Yes.
All right, so,
Cameron, do you agree to the amendment of the motion?
Yeah.
okay, so all those in favor of submitting the text amendment application, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? All right, that motion is approved 500. Now, the motion to submit the map amendment, correct? No, we didn't.
I move we submit the map amendment as well.
Okay. All right, is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All right. Motion from Mr. Rusk, second from Mrs. Lottrop. All those in favor of submitting the map amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right, that's approved 500. Good. Thank you. Next item is the 824 referral, the sale of the Basra GU property.
Okay. Basra Light and Power is a wholly owned subsidiary of Groton Utilities, which is owned by the city of Groton. Basra Light and Power has had an office building in Lebanon, Connecticut, in the section called Gilman, and they, in an effort to be more efficient and for cost savings, they moved into Groton Utilities on the other side of the municipal building here about a year ago, maybe more. And so they have no use, no one has any use for the building that they had used as an office. So Groton Utilities is they're asking for a positive referral to the council to authorize that this be sold, that this building be sold. The city has no other use for it. The building is not even in the city, so it's owned very many steps away, but it's owned by the city technically because it's owned by GU. So they just want to sell it.
Okay, so, and there are, it looks from this handout that we got that there's some complication with how it is, it being consistent with the plan of conservation and development, correct? So
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a complication. I'd say it's because the building is located outside of the city and the POCD does not
cover it.
it does
Okay.
not cover that. There's just nothing direct in the POCD. But I do think that it is consistent with the intent of the POCD in terms of economic responsibility and being able to return that property to, although it wouldn't be to Groton's tax base, it would be returning it to a tax base.
And so I mean, if this property was in the city, we would, we would treat it, it would be covered by the PCOD and we would think about it in the same way, correct?
Yeah.
It's just not. So do we, so in order to give this a positive,
In order to give this a positive referral, we need a motion to give a positive referral to the city council,
right?
provided they deem it to be excess property.
Okay, so, but do we need this other verbiage that's on that's here that we find that although the city's current plan of conservation and development, do we need all that, or?
You
Can we-
can
can we
just
just infer
include
that
the,
from-
yeah, you can just include by referral, you can include the language that's in the memo, if you want to do it that way.
Okay. What's that? Yeah, we can just, I guess we could just,
I move that we issue a favorable referral to Groton City Council to allow the sale of 514 Fitchville Road, parcel identification number 13 tag 02/043 tag 44, provided the City of Groton Legislative Council deems this parcel excess property.
motion to approve by Mr. Rusk. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. James. Any further discussion on the motion? I think we are all in agreement that it certainly meets it's consistent with the plan of conservation and development, although it's not specifically covered by it. Therefore, any other discussion?
I do hate the idea of us giving up our footprint in Barbara or Lebanon, but
We sort of already did that, right? All right. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right. That positive referral is approved 5-0-0. All right, anything else? Do we have anything else we need to talk about tonight? Leslie, anything from you?
Oh, God, no.
No? It's enough. Anybody else have anything? All right. Motion to adjourn?
I move.
Mrs. Lottrop? Is there a second? Second, Ms. Bergeron. All right. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion to adjourn is passed, 5-0-0. We are adjourned at 8:49.
Practice my motions later.
I saw him waiting.
Recording stopped.
You all were amazing.
Thanks, everyone. Everyone, great job. Now, we're looking at a public hearing on December 10th, right?
So that's a special meeting?
Yeah, it'll be a special meeting on December 10th. And do we need,
well, it would be our regular.
No, the 10th.
our regular is the 17th. And we decided to go on the 10th.
Oh, did we decide that?
I think to accommodate everybody's schedule. And if I'm correct, it might be.
Oh,
Yeah, I thought we were canceling the 17th meeting to do
Yeah,
the 10th special meeting.
that was the.
Just
yeah.
because it's so close to
Yep.
Christmas, right?
you're right. I have it on my calendar.
I believe what we
I
said
still have
was
both, but
that if for some reason we can't finish it in one night, that we would continue it to the
no,
second.
we could possibly.
Thank you for
So,
reminding us of that.
just to make sure, I mean, we're street legal to go on the 10th with our application submission timing?
I will be submitting it tomorrow
Okay.
Excellent.
because
So the public hearing, do we have to hear verbal? It has to be
Yeah,
verbal,
that
okay.
And that won't be questions, that'll be questions, comments, concerns, that'll be
Right.
everything.
Everything.
Okay, well,
spears,
okay.
torches.
Yeah,
Burning at the stake.
yeah.
Maybe not this time.
We, well, I mean, we did everything that people asked, right?
Yeah.
Really.
And it's, like, some people were saying, why isn't
building. Well,
Well, they want to see the building, and you know, day one, all we've heard is, we need to revitalize Main Street.
We got a lot of, questions from the public that made it clear that there were folks that thought that we were one being paid by developers. Two, that we represented all government everywhere.
oh no.
You know what I mean? Like, this is an open channel to talk to big government.
Big government.
And that's us,
Yes.
you know?
Yes.
So, I mean, you get a mixture of that kind of feedback, like, why can't you make stop signs green, you know? I mean, you know.
I do want,
It's tough to keep it on topic at some points. Oh, there was an assumption that we were gonna raise every property and build a 6-foot or 6-story building everywhere.
and Leslie needs to update her information because I think the 39 and under are no longer riding bikes, but the little
Scooters.
We're electric bikes.
yes.
Well, but the other thing, I don't wanna get into design, but if you design a place that's bike friendly, people will bike. Like, it's not, it doesn't just have to do with your age, it has to do with your environment. Like, that's just,
And we don't really have.
No, because I'm not hiking, so the age thing is right.
Do I have all the questions here?
I'm worried about hips, knees.
Dave's downhill to be all the way to work, so I ride a bike to work.
And have
How do you get the motorized one?
sorry. I'm over 40. Not long. Yes.
I really wonder about that, zero.
Actually,
Jill, by the way.
I don't argue things. It allows two buildings to be next to each other with more space. The outer side just gives you space. If you have. And this would be, whoever owns the property, any of these properties, owns those properties. We're not that far away. People have to make an important decision. But then it gives you some spatial relief here. So it gives you room, I can't from trees. But you don't forget.
I'm taping housewives, so.
And depending on how they're designed, you may not get all of the, I think the one of the things that makes places cool is to allow people to design their buildings differently.
Good night, thanks. Good night, Jason. Good night, Jill. Thank you.
Thank you. Even if some of them don't want to, they still have to explain the process and why you guys chose what you chose.
We all are this commission, but I'm tired.
Oh, I understand.
I had brought up the new side setback when we first talked about it, and the way I was told about it was, enforce that it's he said that,
Perfectly capable of doing
it's no design.
But you know, that mansplaining.
But I mean,
Well, you know.
I wasn't just talking, there are places where it's 3 feet basically between houses, and we get complaints from that all the time.
There's a difference between I would never want 3 feet. And
But you
3
could do
feet
3 feet,
you
right?
could,